Hey everyone, welcome back to Barter Hordes. My name is Robert, and I'm not usually here midweek, but I thought I would do a video about the first round of the BookTube Prize, because even though I wasn't originally scheduled to judge, I ended up as a substitute. And so I thought I would go through my reaction to the 6 books in the group that I judged. I ended up judging the fiction group A, and it had 2 books that I had already read when I found out I was going to substitute. And so I had 4 more to read to complete the group. And so the way I do judging is the same way I did judging when I was judging speech and debate rounds. I would keep a little grid as I went through, and as each student presented, I would put that student into my grid, so I only had to make a decision about one student at a time, or in this case, one book at a time, instead of waiting till the very end of the round to try to decide the order for all 6. I make them kind of incrementally. So I'm going to talk about the books in the order that I read them and show you where I put them into the rankings relative to the other ones that I had read, and then of course we'll end up with my final rankings after I talk about the 6th book that I read. The first book that I read was The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sara Collins. And this is one that I actually read last summer, not too long after it came out. And normally historical fiction is my wheelhouse. I love historical fiction, so I was all over this one early on. But it didn't really click for me. It's the story of, well, it starts out at a trial at the Old Bailey in London, but it's the story of a former slave who becomes a servant who is accused of murdering both her master and her mistress. And then you go back to the sugar plantation in Jamaica where the other parts of the story take place. And that's exactly the kind of story that I generally like. But for some reason, there was something about the style that I always felt kept me a little bit at a distance. And I can't put my finger on any one specific thing, but I found myself several times while reading this book putting it down and not being very anxious to pick it back up, which for me is always a sign that I'm not really enjoying it that much. So this one wasn't a huge success for me, but it was by no means a bad book, and it's a debut, so I'm looking forward to seeing what Sara Collins writes next. The second book that I read was in January. I read Elif Shafak's book, 10 Minutes, 38 Seconds in This Strange World. And I've talked about this book not too terribly long ago. This book is about Tequila Layla is her name. She is a prostitute in Istanbul. She is found dead at the beginning of the book. She's been murdered and dumped into a big trash bin. But the 10 minutes and 38 seconds in the title, that refers to the amount of time that her brain continues to have activity after her body has died. And during that 10 minutes and 38 seconds, she experiences a bunch of memories that are triggered by smells or whatever. And we essentially get the story of her life in those quick memories. And that takes place over the first half of the book. And then in the second half of the book, you hear about the aftermath of her death from the characters that she's talked about in the first half of the book, which become her adopted family, her close circle of friends. I was blown away by this book. I had never read anything by Elif Shafak before, and I really thoroughly enjoyed this one. I need to pick up more of her writing, and I've been recommended a bunch of titles, and I'm looking forward to that. So after the first 2 books that I read, I had 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World ranked first, and The Confessions of Frannie Langton ranked second. And then in March, when I found out I was going to be substituting, I had to read the other 4 books by the end of March, which really wasn't that hard. I managed that with some time left over, so that was great. The The next one that I read is very short, and that is Girl by Edna O'Brien. This is the story of the schoolgirls in Nigeria who were kidnapped by Boko Haram, and it follows the story of a specific girl in the title, how the girls were kidnapped, taken away to a remote camp, made to do work as slaves, essentially. Many of them were either gang raped and or made to become wives of Boko Haram fighters, as this girl was. And then it follows her escape. There's a government raid on the camp, and she manages to get away with a friend, and it follows her escape. And then eventually she gets back to her own village, and it follows the aftermath of the way she's treated poorly by the people in her own village, as if it were somehow her fault for having been kidnapped in the first place. In terms of story and in terms of emotional impact, this should have been my absolute favorite book of the 6. It has by far the most compelling story. But I didn't really like the book as a reading experience. Like I said, it's very brief, and I actually think in this case that's a flaw. O'Brien doesn't develop a lot of the things that are going on. She doesn't develop the characters very well. She leaves a lot of things in gaps for you to try to piece together as the reader. And I think that blunts the emotions of the story, and we don't really have a chance to connect with what is a hugely powerful emotional story. And so ultimately, it didn't really work that well for me. So after reading that one, my rankings were in first, 10 minutes, 38 seconds in a Strange World. I put Girl second, and I put The Confessions of Frannie Langton third. The fourth book that I picked up is a refugee story, The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri. It's the story of Nuri and Afra. Nuri is the beekeeper that's referred to in the title. And this takes place, of course, in Aleppo, Syria, at the start of, or during Syria's civil war, and the tragedies that ensued for families who were caught in that civil war. Even if you tried to stay, you were at risk because they would conscript you to fight for either the army or the rebels, one or the other. And if you didn't go along with them, they would just shoot you right there in the street. And so this is the story of Nuri and Afra trying to get out of Syria and eventually make their way to England, where Nuri's cousin is already residing, and he was his partner in the beekeeping business in Syria. This story is kind of quiet in some ways for a powerful emotional refugee story, but that quiet is really kind of amazing. You learn in increments what has happened to Nuri and Afra, and what has been so devastating to them emotionally, that to the point where Afra becomes blind. Although the eye doctor can't find anything physically wrong with her eyes, she is unable to see anything for a long time in the book. And Nuri has a version of what we would probably call post-traumatic stress disorder as well. And so you hear about what they have gone through in bits and pieces as they're going through this refugee journey. And it just gets more and more and more powerful and emotional as it goes. This is one that really took me by surprise. It didn't start off as one of my favorites, but it ended up as one of my favorites. And so after finishing the fourth book, my rankings were, first was 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World. Second was The Beekeeper of Aleppo. Third was Girl, and fourth was The Confessions of Frannie Langton. And that leaves two more books. The next book that I read was Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other, which, as you all know, was the co-winner of the most recent Booker Prize. It's the story of, well, it's actually 12 different stories. It's told in a series of individual stories that intertwine with each other over the course of the book. And I like that kind of a format. I mentioned to you several times over the last couple of months that I really liked interlinked stories. David Soloy's book, Turbulence, was one of my favorites that did that. And this book is a huge favorite among booktubers and critics around the world. And I can see why people are so taken to this book. I had kind of a mixed reaction. Parts of it I thought were just absolutely wonderful, and parts of it I thought were really uneven and didn't match up with the rest of the book. One of my favorite parts, one of the things that she does, is she'll give you a story of a character like a mother who's talking about her own daughter in the story. And then the next story might well be from the daughter's point of view, and it's talking about the mother, and you get very different takes on their dynamic in their relationship. And I thought that was really an excellent aspect of this book. I did think, however, that some were very emotionally engaging, and some I finished the story and it's like, wait, what happened? And I just wasn't drawn into that particular story at all, or how it related to the other stories. And at times I had some problems with some of the characters. I think at times she falls into using some stereotypes instead of developing individual people to make her political points. And it is a political book, there's no doubt about it. She's making some political points here. So I liked the book. I didn't love the book. I think it was rewarded by the Booker Prize for its social commentary more than it was for its quality of writing. It's a well-written book, but I don't think it was the best book written in the last year. So after reading 5 books, my rankings were 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World was first. The Beekeeper of Aleppo was second. I put Girl, Woman, Other in third. Girl was fourth, and The Confessions of Frannie Langton was fifth. So that leaves me one more book to read, and that is Your House Will Pay by Steph Cha. I did not know much about this book at all going in. I had seen a couple of reviews, but I'd kind of skimmed over them knowing I was going to be reading it for the prize, and so I didn't pay a lot of attention to other people's reviews. This book has a dual timeline. The first timeline is in 1991, and it's based on an actual story in Los Angeles where a Korean shopkeeper accuses a teenage African-American girl of stealing, in the real story, some orange juice. In the book, I think it was milk, and shoots her and kills her. And she wasn't actually stealing. It was a misunderstanding that escalated. That's what happens in 1991. Of course, that's the era of the Rodney King beatings as well. And so those riots in Los Angeles were all going on at that same time. The more contemporary story in this book brings the two families back together. The Korean American family that owned the shop. The mother was convicted of I believe it was a form of manslaughter, and was never sent to prison. And she just kind of disappeared, and she started a new life as the owner of, or as co-owners of, a pharmacy. And then it also follows the African-American family who lost the girl who was killed in the convenience store. And it's a story about how those two families get linked back together again in contemporary times, several decades after the fact, 30 years after the fact of the original shooting. And I just thought it was really well done. I think Steph Cha does a really good job of not letting political leanings show in terms of who she's favoring in this story, one family or the other. Both of them are sympathetic. Both of them are at fault for things. Both of them have pasts that they're not happy about. But the way they come back together again, I think, in this book is really interesting. And so I really enjoyed this one. So my final rankings were: number 1 was 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World. Number 2 was The Beekeeper of Aleppo. I put Your House Will Pay as my third choice, and I put Girl, Woman, Other as my fourth choice. and then Girl was 5th, and The Confessions of Frannie Langton was 6th. Now, in terms of what actually went through, my first two choices did both go through. 10 minutes, 38 seconds advanced to the quarterfinals. The Beekeeper of Aleppo advanced to the quarterfinals. But Girl, Woman, Other advanced instead of my third choice, Your House Will Pay. So I had the third and fourth books kind of reversed in terms of what would advance and what wouldn't advance. And that happens all the time. I can see why people advanced Girl, Woman, Other. I think it has a lot of merit. So I think I ended up, even though it was an accident, I ended up with what I think was a really good book, or a good group. My least favorite book of the 6 was still okay. Like I said, I didn't hate it. I certainly didn't love it, but it was somewhere in the middle, and all the other ones were even better than that. And I ended up reading a couple of books that I might not have read otherwise that I just thought were out of this world. So I was really pleased with the way my group turned out. So that is Fiction Group A from the Octafinals. We're now a week into the quarterfinals. I hope you're following along. If you want to see more videos like this from the judges talking about their judge experience, go over to the BookTube Prize channel, which I have linked in the description box, and I've set up a playlist of, I think it's about 35 or 36 videos now from judges talking on their channels about their reading experiences from first round of the BookTube Prize. So if you want to see how different people have reacted to the same group of books, that's a good place to start. And I may not have found all of the videos, but those are the ones that I've come across. Okay, I'll talk to you again on Friday. Hope you're having a decent week, trying to stay healthy and stay safe and not go stir crazy. I hope you're reading something good. My reading life has not changed much. I read all day anyway, so that hasn't really changed. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.